Okay, so here we are, the 6th OBANZ community call. So welcome everyone, and welcome to those who are tuning in for the first time. Some of you that I've seen are joining us today have tuned in before, so welcome back. So just a little bit before we get started, I'll just do a brief introduction of everyone who's in the room, or actually I'll let them introduce themselves, and then I'll talk a little bit about kind of what we're doing with the Open Badges community calls for Australia and New Zealand and how they run. Okay, so just a little bit about me. My name is Joyce Seisinger. You might know me on Twitter as @catpajamasnz, and I'm an education technologist, currently working as a consultant for my own company, Academic Tribe. All right, we've also got with us Dr. Bron Stuckey, who is a gamification expert, and I'm not sure whether she'll be wanting to introduce herself because she's got the flu and she's losing her voice, but you can all say hi to her in the Mopad because she'll be facilitating the Mopad for us today in the Etherpad. And then the person who's speaking today about our case study is Dr. Inger Mewburn. Inger, can you just introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm the Director of Research Training at Australian National University, and I run the Thesis Whisperer blog. I'm an expert in research education. Is that enough?
That's fine, thank you. And then we've also got another panelist today with us who is also working at the university level on Open Badges in Australia, and that's Kate Coleman. Kate, would you just like to give an introduction?
Hello, I'm a researcher and a project manager on a big strategic grant on curating, credentialing, and what that means to carry forward digital learning evidence at Deakin, in partnership with Curtin, Haystack, Mozilla, Able, Telstra, Cisco, ESA, and somebody that I shouldn't have forgotten, Centre for Recording Achievement in the UK. Also a PhD student at Melbourne Uni studying portfolios and digital credentialing in art education.
Excellent, and we're really, really lucky to have you join us today so we can pick your brains, and we hope we'll see you in future OBANZ calls as well to pick your brains a little bit further. And it's the Centre for Recording, well, I forget what its new name is. That's what used to be City and Guilds in the UK, is that right? Yeah, yeah. All right, so just a little bit about how we've done the OBANZ call. So we started these at the beginning of the year, and there is myself, Bronwyn Stuckey, and Dean Groom as well, who is supposed to be in the room, but I'm sure he's on his way, who decided to start facilitating these just to get a little bit of information sharing for people who are working on Open Badges in Australia and New Zealand. Mainly because the community calls, which used to be run by Mozilla and are now run by Badge Alliance, are basically always in the middle of the night for us on this side of the world, and so we thought it would be really good. And I did stay up, and I know that Kate regularly stays up until like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning in order to join the calls, but nobody really enjoys that. You have to be really, really passionate about Open Badges. And anyway, you know, there are some interesting things happening here now, so we decided it would be a good idea to start the community calls on this side of the world, but we've tried to keep them kind of a similar format as the Badge Alliance calls, so that people can switch between them, and so that the format is just common and people know where they are. So one of the things that we are using in order to help facilitate this is an Etherpad or a Mopad, which is actually hosted by Mozilla, so hence the word Mopad. And we've tweeted out the link a few times already. You can also find the link in the Google Plus event. And as you can see, and I'm just going to look in there, I can see that we've got several people there. So what we've got there, we've got a collaborative note-taking tool, and feel free to put in any questions or issues that you want to raise, as Inger kind of tells us about her case study, that you can just put there in the collaborative note-taking space. And in fact, you know, feel free to just kind of take notes there and help Bron out in order to kind of transcribe what we're doing here. And the other thing that we would like to do is, the first thing that we would like to do is just at the top of that page, just add your details to the roll call so that we know who's here and so that people can find each other again if they want to talk to each other after this meeting ends. And I can see that Tara is here from New Zealand. Ron, if Tara wants to join into the panel, that would be really, really helpful. Maybe you can add her. I think you can send her, you can forward her that invite. So basically, what we're doing with the OBANZ calls is that we run them, and I'll just need to pardon my Google Hangout again. Basically, we run them 2 times a month. The first one is very much an open space call, which is free for anyone to kind of suggest topics that they want to explore or questions that they've got, and we'll try to get a mixed panel of people who can kind of answer each other's questions. And the second one that we run that month is on the 3rd Wednesday. So the first one's on the 1st Wednesday, second one's on the 3rd Wednesday of the month, and we try to have a particular case study. Now, just because of the connections that we've got, we've had quite a few university-type case studies, but we would also love to hear from some case studies in corporates or from some case studies at a K through 12 level. So if you've got any links for us there, if you can suggest any speakers, all the way at the bottom of the moped is room to suggest other speakers. So we'd really appreciate that as well, because I think it'd be good to kind of diversify. I see that Dean has just arrived, but without prevaricating too much, I think, maybe get started with Inger. And because I don't know quite where we'll do that either. But we'll get started and listen to Inger's story and have her put like a little bit of an introduction about her Open Badges project at ANU. And then we'll just take it from there. Okay, Inger, are you ready?
Yeah, thanks. I managed to write a few things on the piece of paper. Sorry, everyone, it's been a very busy week. Thanks for inviting me along. I'm so thrilled to be here because one of the good things about working on Open Badges has just been that the community that's around this project has really been awesome and supportive, so it's been great. So thanks for having me on. So our story started back with actually Joyce and I having a coffee after a Zumba class, and Joyce has been talking to me about badges for quite some time, and I'll admit I was pretty skeptical. I thought they sounded a bit silly, actually. My son's doing Scouts, and I thought it was a bit juvenile and that people wouldn't take it up. And then one day, Joyce got a bit frustrated with me and took out her computer and showed me the Web Navigator badge. And for me, that was a real game changer because I suddenly saw what she was talking about, what she meant by sort of activity-based assessment. So I started to think on how we might adapt Open Badges into the research student space. And the research student space is interesting because in Australia, at least, there's not very much coursework. And one thing we know that research students struggle with is that absence of benchmarking. So there's no class that you're in. You can't place yourself in the class to know, am I doing HD-wise? Am I doing pass? Am I doing credit? And also, the people come into research degree with a wide variety of skills. There's a wide variety of ages. So we have people at ANU from 22 years old to 82 years old, and obviously that diversity brings an amazing atmosphere, but also a lot of challenges. An 82-year-old has a lot of life experience, obviously, and often a long professional history, but sometimes little computer skills, and it might be vice versa for a 22-year-old. So we have to be really mindful of that when we're providing support services and professional development opportunities. So it struck me when I saw what Joyce was doing with badges, and then I had a little bit of a look at some of the early work that Deakin was doing, that badges could be sort of waypoints or anchors in a very fuzzy HDR space, a high degree by research. When I say that, that's what I mean. A very fuzzy space that they occupy. We could help them identify skills that they maybe didn't know that they needed to develop, and it would also help them to measure themselves against some sort of yardstick and also provide some evidence for picking up all the extraneous skills that they pick up while they're doing their PhD project: management, writing, knowledge of research, ethics, integrity, and library skills, just to name a few. So that was where I sort of saw the fit of badges. So I took the project to Lindsay Agins, who was at the time inside the College of Asia and Pacific Digital team. And Lindsay was enthusiastic about the idea, and we developed it a bit together. And then Lindsay left just as the OLT seed grant went in. So we carried on, though she graciously let us carry on the project. And the project ended up being a collaboration between CAP, College of Asia Pacific Digital, and the library. And the library's been really important, but I'll get back to that a bit later. We were lucky enough to have Katie Friend, who moved from University of Wollongong to ANU, join the project, and she'd been doing some badging work up at Wollongong. So Katie and Emily Rutherford and myself are the main players, with some help from other people, such as Kim Blackmore and Amid. So we submitted the project. We got the seed grant. It's a small grant from the government, just to explore the idea. So we went through the process of the grant. That wasn't any trouble. Then the first thing I did was, as the grant was being written, Mozilla brought out their badge kit, and I thought, perfect. And then Moodle started to put together their badges, and I thought, this will be really easy. You know, technically, the tools that I thought I had to build have been built. Fantastic. Little did I know that that's where my trouble just started. The first thing I did was obviously go to ANU online and say, could you please turn on badges for me in Moodle? And they said, well, no, we're not going to do that. And I was like, oh, okay. And they said, well, you know, maybe you give out a badge for anything. Where's the quality control? And I said, well, you know, that's what we're trying to explore. This is the space that we're interested in. And they said, okay, fair enough, but you need to go and see legal. So off we trotted to legal, and that's where we fell down the rabbit hole. It turns out that ANU is under a different set of legislation from any other university in the country, because we're a national university, not a state university. And so we're subject to provisions in the privacy policy that probably don't bother other people. So long story short was, because Moodle would hand out student email addresses, this broke our covenant with the government, so we couldn't use Moodle. We looked at a couple of other systems, and in the end we had to do a risk analysis and get that signed off by the DVCA. Legal have never said actually it's okay for us to purchase any external badge providers. So we went through quite a long process. This took about 6 months of talking with legal, who were very helpful, but they're working within the boundaries of what's been set up by the government. And the systems. And then we got to marketing, and we thought we would probably have some trouble with marketing. As it turns out, marketing have been highly supportive of the project and have talked about how to create sort of sub-branding. So aside from the legal hurdle, once we got through that, we were able to finally, after 6 months of effort, issue our first badge. And the reason we could get through the legal settings in the end was because of the research ethics framework that we put around the project when we wanted to publish some results. So because the research ethics framework asks students for informed consent, that means that we're absolved of the privacy policy problems. Now, our research design was set up around the badges to be a very lightweight user acceptance testing model. So we, as a first badge that we've tried, and we only got this in 2 weeks ago, is our research integrity training course, which is a compulsory training course for all research students. Had a badge put in it, and it was just offered in the top left-hand corner of the page, and it said, there's a badge, we're trialling badges, if you're interested, click here. And last time we looked, out of about 72 people who completed the course, who were eligible for a badge, 5 people had gone there and had downloaded the badge. And I thought that was pretty interesting, because there's no incentive. We don't give them any reason to take it. We don't say that it's a token that they can use for their records. So that's just purely from interest. That's purely because, oh, here's a badge, I might click on it and get it. So we're going to follow that up subsequently with an email to the people who didn't collect the badge and say, hey, it's now valid as a token for your records that you can use to tell us you've done the course. And we'll see if that gets more people interested. So we'll be able to sort of measure these different acceptance, you know, what you're actually asking people to take a badge for and why they'd accept it. along with everyone who does accept the badge, then gets a very lightweight survey, and the survey just asks, what are you going to do with the badge when you've got it, and would you like to do another one? Everyone wanted to do another one, so there's only 5 responses to the survey. It's a bit early to tell. People were very unsure what they were going to do with the badge. Only one person said that they'd put it in Facebook. So I think there's a long way to go with educating users and students as to the value and why they take the badge. But I'm heartened by the fact that they took it up for no real reason at all. So at least there's about 20% interest in it just for that reason. So what we've got on the pipeline now is Emily Rutherford at ANU Library is starting to develop some digital literacy badges. Now, we did a focus group before we started this part of the work, and we, broadly speaking, asked the students what kind of things they'd be interested in earning badges for, and really what came out of that is that they were very interested in technical skills, in using badges as a measure and a way to learn technical skills. So Emily's developing some fantastic EndNote badges, so that they go through really sort of rigorous activities about manipulating data in EndNote and entering it and understanding how the databases in EndNote work. I was really excited when I looked at her sketch designs on that. I think these are going to be really useful badges for students that will actually teach them a lot about EndNote, and I think that they will be popular. That's my feeling, though. We'll see what the research tells us at the other end. So Emily, at the moment, I believe, is working on 3 badges that are part of that kit of badges. So there'll be the research integrity plus the 3 badges from the library. That will probably be it from this project. ANU and different players at ANU have been very, very interested in the work. Alumni are obviously very interested. They were particularly interested in the findings from the City of Learning in Chicago, which showed that users came back and put badges back where they'd originally placed them in a backpack. So that sense that they'd return home for the alumni people was really interesting, because it meant that their relationship with ex-students takes on a whole other dimension. Marketing are obviously very excited and very interested in this project, because they see this as a way for knowledge of what ANU does and ANU's brand to travel in different places. So our next step is looking at a bigger 3-year OLT grant. Again, looking at the HDR, looking at the research student space, but probably with a heavy emphasis on statistical learning. That's probably what we're thinking about at the moment. So I suppose, given that I have so many brains on deck, I'd be interested to hear any ideas that anyone has for what they think this space of research students, what other additional sort of badges might be interesting. Also developing a MOOC on research supervision on the edX platform, and I'm trying to look at integration with badges in there. So far they're just talks, it's under development. We haven't got any clear direction yet as to whether edX is going to integrate it on their platform, but that will be one to watch. Yeah, I suppose maybe open it up for questions, Joyce.
Yeah, thanks for that, Inger. That's given us a good idea about the project. Can you tell us a little bit about the timeline you've got? Like, when are you supposed to be finished, and like, what are you supposed to have achieved by that time?
Yeah, that's good. Well, I just submitted our progress report. We're halfway through a 1-year project at this point in time, so I've got another 6 months to deliver. We have a paper, and I've not heard back yet from Ascolite, but there's a paper called Badge Trouble being done at Ascolite, which is talking about our trouble in more detail. And the grant itself it didn't specify any number of badges. We were a bit like, yeah, we'll just do some badges. So I think the 4 or 5 that we'll have will be sufficient. But we will be preparing a high-level white paper, and the white paper is specifically going to address the research student space and the potentials of badges, but some of the barriers, and particularly we're interested in sort of that particular cohort's knowledge of and interest in badges. So that's really what the research is directed towards. So hopefully the user testing will give us some good statistical results, and of course also the analytics, just a number of people that work through the various things that we're going to put out there. We did originally say in our proposal that we would put everything open access, and that hasn't proved possible on the Moodle platform. Our activities are happening in Moodle, and then the badges are issued by Credly. So we can't let non-ANU users into Moodle. So we'll have to talk with the OLT about that, but we might have to try and find a way to replicate the learning materials outside of Moodle, and if we did that, we'll probably put it on edX, I would say, because that's a really supple platform.
Okay. With that, I think I might just give the mic to Kate, and mainly because I think one of the things that I wanted to pick up on that you mentioned is about, kind of putting the badges out there and just kind of waiting to see whether the students were going to be interested in it or not. And you've had 5 who actually took up the badge when it was there, and like one of them said that they shared it via Facebook. And I would love to hear from Kate a little bit more, because she's been doing this at Deakin as well. Do you do you push the badges at students, or do you just kind of make them available and make it quite voluntary, and kind of what kind of experience she's had with that? So Kate, perhaps you could chime in.
Happy to. We've actually had our students play a role in the design of the badge as well. So the students who would actually be the people who would apply for the badge are actually the ones who are doing the final designs on the criteria and on the description of the badges and on what they look like, so that we could gauge some of the value in terms of student perspective on what badges would be like for them. And I think that's been a really interesting component of I guess bringing badges into a learning environment where, Deakin has a particular population anyway. It's a low SES, first in family. It's a good space to think about something, I guess, alternative, to be able to present yourself and to stand, I guess, alone inside a big cohort. I think our student numbers are up at 50,000 this year. So there's a lot of Deakin students, and it does set you aside. Our research as well in spaces where students have been involved have led to different discussions around badges in those institutions. So at Dartmouth, I've been working really closely with Michael and Mike, the academic developers there. They've done the same thing. Students have been involved in the actual criteria and description designs. And so I guess you've been doing that capacity build that we need to do throughout. Instead of after, we've done it beforehand, and it has really changed the conversation. And a conversation around currency, which we wanted to get to quickly, and it enabled that rather than finding out what the currency would be afterwards.
Yeah, I think it's funny because ANU is probably diametrically opposed to Deakin on almost every metric. We're small, so we have 22,000 students in total, of which 8,000 odd are postgraduates. So we're tilted towards that end of the scale. We don't have many low SES, although we have obviously equity programs, but we don't. I'm not sure of our numbers, but we'd certainly be very heavy on, we draw from quite a lot of private schools. We have private colleges, so we are a very different cohort. It's also, I think, an older cohort. At least in the HDR space, in most universities. But we do draw quite a few people from the public service who are into our HDR community. So it's quite different. I came from RMIT, and I've noticed a very, very different sort of student cohort at ANU. And one thing we noticed with that difference is that they didn't want their badges to look like fun. They didn't. As one person has said in our focus group, I don't want it to look like something that my kid would bring home from the daycare centre. That was that real sense that they wanted it to bear the ANU brand, if possible the ANU crest, which of course is not possible, and according to marketing, but they really wanted it to look official, to look, you know, serious, to look heavyweight. They didn't want sort of fun, and that was unanimous. So I think it just goes to show the diversity that of the audiences that we're dealing with these badges. I think that personally, I think that's quite a fascinating aspect of this kind of research.
Yeah, I think the visual design is really interesting because there are so many different audiences for it. You know, on the one hand, there's the earner themselves, and they might want something quite different from what an employer would want, or what, you know, somebody else might see when they see that badge. So it actually has to fit lots of different flavors, and it has to have longevity, the visual design as well. Like, you might do something that kind of fits in with what's currently a contemporary design, but, you know, what is that going to look like 2, 3, 4 years from now? How are other universities managing this case?
Okay.
Sorry, I was having some issues with my mouse to click my mic off. They're all doing it very differently, and like we've talked about, I mean, I think that the most exciting research that really needs to happen in badges is the different populations, the different audiences, and then the different purposes, and starting to look across them. I think in about 2 years' time will be outstanding, because even if you just jump into Credly and you start opening up each of the badges, and I'm an incredible nerd. I spent 2 hours in a badge design workshop this afternoon, and I was doing just that, opening up between all of the different, and I was only going through the research ones, opening them up and having a look at the commonalities between each of the badges, the kinds of language that they're using, the kinds of descriptors that they're using, the semiotics that are wrapped up in the language of the image. Not everyone is using dates, which I think is really interesting, because I really think a date needs to be on the front of these images, not in the back, but I think they need to be sitting up front, because if we're talking about badges as credentials or micro-credentials, I think a date needs to be somewhere wrapped up in that little JPEG image. But if you have a look at them and you look across them, they're all very different. And I think that that's some of the most exciting bits, because that's what we know that badges do. It transforms what that tester is unable to do. And so if you jump in and you look at what a Dartmouth badge looks like, or you look at what a Purdue badge looks like, the ones that are coming out of Chicago at DePaul are outstanding. Nicole Pinkard will actually be in my Uni SA workshop in September. Now, they're doing really lovely stuff, because they're working with the Clinton Global Initiative, and they're thinking about adult workplace badges. And so again, it's all wrapped up in that semiotic, which I think we probably need to do some more work on, and what the semiotics mean for each of the different audiences. So what they mean for the cachet of the ANU postgrad student is something very different from the undergrad student that I've worked on just on that one set of badges. And each of those audiences has something really, I mean, there's a really beautiful research project in that. I think it will be, and it's a couple of years away, but if we start to look at what the undergrad badges look like, and what their value is, and what their currency is to each of the audiences, to the employers, to the students, to the teachers, to the institutions. There's all this stuff wrapped up in all of these little images, forgetting what's even in the descriptors that sit behind them.
Yeah, and that actually, sorry, that actually makes me want to, that brings up another point, because, Inger, you're working on research training, and Kate, you've been looking at research badges, etc., for students, and there are other universities doing this as well. And Dean just posted as well that he's looking at doing a similar project for UTS. And maybe, Dean, this is a good point to bring you in and kind of get your feedback on this, because with everyone kind of reinventing the wheel and everyone doing the same thing, surely a badge like saying, what would stop UTS from actually saying, all right, well, Beacon and ANU have already done this, what can I take away from those projects? And, if the open badges are supposed to be open, how can I repurpose that for us?
Can you hear me? I'll adjust my mic. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm only working part-time at UTS on a project in the library, and one of the things that we're looking at is how we can integrate some of the things that libraries do into courses, and the aim of it is to try and kind of horizontally dovetail literacy skills that are needed in various courses, especially in specialist courses around using databases, and then to be able to put staff in charge of that kind of badge stack. But I kind of see this as a talent tree because I play Skyrim, so I'm really not looking at it in the same sort of way. So I'm not particularly interested in Google Analytics, and there's a whole things that I'm interested in, not interested in. So, but I mean, at this point, it's just a conversation I'm beginning to have at UTS, because they're increasingly looking at how do we create more integrated like modules of learning or online learning for students to onboard them early, and how do we change it across the different first, second, third, and fourth years. So really, I'm kind of just looking at that level at the moment. I guess the end point for me will be in Drupal, because that's the web engine. And somehow that's how it will come out of this. But it's certainly not part of an e-learning or a learning management type approach. This is really, it's a way that staff can start to say, okay, we do all this stuff over here really well, and there are things that we want to get into, and to create some capacity of staff to do self-directed learning. And then when they implement what they're doing, because they design a badged course, they get some sort of leverage into an ownership over that. So it's very early days. I mean, I've only been there a couple of weeks just looking at this sort of stuff, but really I'm still thinking about how we can turn the agenda of digital literacy and workflows and student workloads into some kind of system where staff can say, okay, well, I can see that cohort, most of them have done this or they've done that. So it's a kind of more of a panopticon approach, but today, very early days. It's interesting that other people are doing it, and certainly ANU Libraries having a go at it. I have no idea about the ramifications of ethics or legal or law, or I haven't even had the IT guy yet to see whether they want to do it. But at this point, I'm maybe just trying to do a proof of concept and just get a conversation started. So we're nowhere near being funded, and so I'm only part-time until the end of the year at this point. So who knows where it'll go? But you know what I mean? I just pick the ball up and run that way, and then just see what happens. But definitely, I kind of see it as a way in which the entire library can start to think about how can we build talent trees for students, and how can we build those trees out, and then how can we maintain a kind of infrastructure that can support that, because there's always going to be like trade-offs. Well, if we do this, we can't do the other. So there's a whole range of things, I guess, that I'm trying to do. But my approach would be all across to not just higher education, but to schools as well. Of how can I come up with a system in which kids can come up with talent trees that they know a lot about. How can they design talent trees for themselves, which is kind of like that self-directed learning stuff, but within a structure that schools can measure. So, and the conversation about the design of the badge, I'll just go to a freelancing place online probably and just pay a couple €100 and someone will go and design me a whole bunch of badges. That's just production to me. So, but I certainly would just hand that out to a professional designer, and I would try and avoid getting caught in committee meetings about what badges look like, because that would just be really dull.
Well, that's been my life for the last 6 months, doing committee meetings about what badges look like. Who should own them? Who should control them? And how do we ensure quality? And I suppose I think there's almost a high anxiety around that at ANU, and I think that comes from partly positioning within the DOA, partly its own self-image of, if you can call it of a research-intensive university and a high-profile university that's in the top 100. That sort of that positioning. And when we did our focus groups, what kind of surprised me but intrigued me was the level of anxiety that our cohort expressed around a whole range of things: forgery, perception of the badges, theft. So there's clearly and also, well, can I have the badges, but can I have a printout to say what badges I've got? So the trust issues and the idea of where the badges are, what value they have as an exchange item. It's a really
and it's really interesting because it's like if you think about it, traditionally universities don't get to design items, artifacts like that very often. Like they'll probably design the diploma like redesign it maybe once every 5 years whenever they get a new logo or a new slogan, you know. So it's not something that they're really used to, and and those aren't very imaginative either. Like there's certain things that are going to have to be on them, and in a way there's almost more freedom. Now I noticed Kate vehemently shaking and nodding her head. So Kate, do you just want to jump in there?
Well, firstly, I think, yes, you can go get designers to do things, but you know what? We work in institutions where you actually can't just do that. And I understand, because I've been in this, you know, this year, as Inger has been, universities have a lot riding on this. They have a lot riding on their brands. They have a lot riding on their reputations. And if we use the language of currency when we talk about badges, and the university has currency. You know, I don't think that you can just badge anything and you can get designers to just design anything, because I mean, if we're really talking about semiotics wrapped up in image, we need to be very careful with the brand. We also need to be very careful not to conflate the currency of the badge or to deflate it. You know, there's a whole heap of stuff wrapped up in this. It's not as easy as, oh, let's go badge, because we've seen MOOCs badging like crazy. I've got so many really crappy empty badges that don't mean anything. They don't represent me. They don't say anything about what I can do, and they have anything wrapped up in their image. They look really glossy and shiny, and they maybe have a university brand attached to them in terms of name, but they are empty. And I think that if we're going to really transform education, which is where most of us are thinking our badger talk is right now, and we want to do some really good assessment reform in higher ed, and that's where my perspective is, then I don't think that we can do this willy-nilly. I think this needs to be carefully worked out, and I'm not talking about standardization, but there needs to be some standards, and that's what's happening in the Badge Alliance. We have weekly standardized discussions. We're developing policies together because we do know that the currency is really important. And yes, there are some skills and experience and there are some knowledge that we can badge and we can probably do quickly, but there are other things that I think that we need to be cautious about because of what we're representing.
All right, now I'm just aware, because I'm trying to keep an eye on the chat as well, and I don't want to lose anyone. So there's a few questions in there. Sorry, I'm just in the moped. And one of the questions is around what is edX, and edX is basically a MOOC platform, and I think that got started out of someone. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was it Stanford that edX came out of? Yeah.
It's an MIT and Harvard collaboration. And the difference between the edX platform and Coursera and the other MOOCs is the platform itself is open source. And that's why I even decided to go with edX. And University of Queensland are also using edX. And I'm enjoying the platform as an ongoing tool. I think there could be more social tie-in with it, but as far as an LMS goes, it's not too bad.
Yeah. Now, one of the other questions just in there, thanks for that, Inger. One of the other questions in there is, how did you design your badges? And this person is asking not specifically about like the metadata and stuff, but they're, well, sorry, not specifically around the criteria, but more around the visual design, like what tool did you use? And Inger, you were mentioning Credly?
Yeah, we had our in-house graphic designer do a mock-up that actually had nothing to do with the AU brand, but it looked very Ivy League. It even had some ivy on it. So it looks very serious. And we're using this as our badge. So we are using Credly to issue the badge. And that's actually quite a cost-effective platform for us. I think it cost me $300 to purchase 3 years of subscription. I can't remember. There wasn't very much. So for the whole institution to be able to use it, it's actually a bit of a no-brainer. So Credly's worked really well there. What we're doing now is when we issue that badge, is what we will insert into our user acceptance test as soon as we have something back from marketing's graphic designer, is a series of other potential designs for that badge. And we're going to get the students, when, you know, the people who fill in the survey, to vote on what badge design they like best. So we're trying to sort of crowdsource that a little bit to see what people think. So yeah, it's just basic sort of vector graphics really. It's nothing fancy in Photoshop as far as so it's pretty straightforward. And you can get Credly badges that sort of mix and match. You can just sort of choose an outline, choose an icon, and so on. But we thought we'd actually go through the process of preparing all the graphics ourselves, mostly because part of this project is to test things like how long does it take to do X? You know, what sort of skills does a person need? Say Emily Rutherford at the library, who's fantastic part of this project, has of her own accord been interested in gamification for a while, but has found when she's working with Katie Freund, there's a whole bunch of learning design skills that she's having to acquire. So we're expecting people to actually have very sophisticated understandings of learning design and online learning when they might be a subject matter specialist in something else entirely. I know I am, and I've had to learn a lot about how you'd even design an activity. And I think Joyce made this point when she came to talk at ANU and to help us in our workshops on badge design, is that, you know, learning design is a very particular set of skills, but it's like graphic design or even like architecture. Everyone thinks that they can design a billboard. Everyone thinks that they can draw a house, but actually a proper learning designer has a whole set of arcane knowledge that other people don't have. But it's hard to assert the value of that knowledge when it's not a very stabilised profession. Like architecture has professional bodies, and the professional bodies around learning design are much more vague. And there's very few courses that specialise just in online learning design. And I think that it's not recognised as the set of skills that it is. And so one of the things I've really learned is you can't just throw someone in like Emily, who's incredibly intelligent, able, capable, subject matter expert, and expect her to be able to do this. She needs the help of someone like Katie, who's got that learning design background. So this project is really teasing out what those resource implications are for the university. And this is really crucial, you know, because we've always got budget sheets that we have to manage to. And I want to echo Kate's talk about what universities have at stake in their public reputation. It's, you know, it creates all sorts of aggravations if you don't work with that, in my experience. And so we very deliberately chose to go at the hardest bits, you know, to sit in all those meetings with legal, to have all those really long emails, because we wanted to know what does it really take actually to get a project like this off the ground. And let me tell you, it's heaps more work than I even thought, and I thought it was going to be a big project. So, so it's been enlightening.
And I just want to say I'm sad to say that we lost Tara, because I think she was just putting in the mopad that but she's hopefully going to be our case study for next month. So it would be great to hear from her, because she was just saying that they've actually set up their own badge, their open backpacks as well for the students, and I guess they're using the badge kit. Are you, Tara? Maybe you can just put it in the mopad. But you know, which is another thing that lets you actually design your badges right there. But you can set it up for your own organization, so that would be interesting. And one thing I wanted to revisit, though, and Kate, I'd love to get your views on it, and you know, anybody else who wants to jump in as well, is, you know, so Inger's got this grant, and you've got an OLT grant at Beacon, and you guys are doing all this work on designing badges and designing them for particular digital literacies or for particular research literacies. You know, do we really want all of the universities of Australia to go and replicate that? Isn't that a huge double up? And aren't there economies of scale that could be employed there? And what's happening in that space?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because my feeling is that we are going to reinvent the wheel everywhere like we do with everything else. But then one of the arguments against MOOCs is that idea that you can have a superstar lecturer that is just cut and paste to every other university. I like the idea of the diversity of people developing their own. I mean, in some ways it's inefficient, but I will do something very differently to the way that Kate will do something, to the way that Dean will do something, and I think that there's values in those differences. And although my ultimate aim is to make everything as open as possible, even if I made it open, there's not necessarily the sense that people would take it up or would consider it. You know, I'd always look at someone else's materials and go, yeah, I really like that and I really like that, but I think I'd add this or I'd take away that. And I think that's part of the creativity of teaching. Maybe I'm being Pollyanna-ish.
I totally
Okay.
agree. Totally
Sorry.
agree. I think that we all do assessment differently. We have same standards, but and we talk about standards because we do need to be able to have valid and reliable assessment and all that other stuff that we talk about in in education. But the skills and experience and the knowledge is different per discipline, per teacher, per school. And I saw. And I don't know, Grant talking about issuing badges and the trust thing that sits around that with teachers and students. That's the bit that we shouldn't replicate because, and I just wrote in there, Serge from Europortfolio talks about badges as trust systems, and that's the bit about badges that I actually really love, which means that maybe our higher level badges, the ones that are big, mega badges branded by the university, need to have something that maybe is, not common to them. Because they're branded and they're marketed in terms of the university, and maybe our other skills and experience, knowledge things within our disciplines might have some similarities, and then there'll be some other things that we badge maybe underneath that are just about what happens between us and the trust in our students and what happens in our learning environments. So that there's no one size fits all. I think that that's actually the exciting opportunity that we've got in badges that we've not seen, in the 3 to 5 summative assessment tasks that we do per semester, where we do start to end up with very similar assessments because of what we're wrapped up with time and marking and everything else that, hangs around that. Badges can open up some of those opportunities, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because just playing devil's advocate. Obviously there are things that, like, if ANU now develops like a really good set of EndNote badges that prove that a research student has mastery of EndNote, then why would somebody else go and recreate their own slightly differently, with slightly different criteria? It just feels like there would be a lot of doubles there. Plus, the other thing there is that, if I earn it at Deakin, can I take it with me to ANU? And I guess that's one of the questions that we've asked a few times in this forum as well. Is like, okay, so if you're doing badges out, what are you doing about badges in? What is your university going to accept other people's badges?
We're so underdeveloped in that space. So immature in thinking that one through. If you think about how we do it, even with our paper systems at the moment, with our recognition of prior learning, I think that is pretty hard. That whole system is fairly underdeveloped. So that's the interesting work I think Deakin's really forging ahead with in this space is badging as a recognition of some prior learning. But whether or not then ANU will then accept Deakin badge, I think we're a long way from that kind of, and I wonder whether it will ever happen. But I've been proved wrong on lots of things, so I'll take my researcher skeptic.
Yeah, and I suppose that's where that whole idea of the trust networks or the trust systems comes in. Like it's all fine for everyone to be issuing them, but who's going to trust each other's things? And I'm always surprised that, like, for instance, something like EduRoam, that there were somehow enough universities that got together in order to get EduRoam to work, and they all agreed that they were going to do this thing. And I can't even imagine what it would be like to try to get that for open badges. But perhaps this is something that you guys, because Deakin has kind of like jumped the shark there, in that they are using the open badges for the RPL. Kate, can you share something about that?
Yeah, so Deakin has set up a company, a subsidiary, that, I guess, so November 13 we're holding a big national forum on badges at Deakin, and it will, I guess, be the launch of what's really happening in terms of what credentialing will look like in that space. So if you're interested, come and have a listen to that. There'll be lots of things launched about what that is doing. But in terms of credentialing and micro-credentialing, and that's why we're really concerned about this, the currency and the value of badges when you do need to start talking about badges as micro-credentials. And I'm discovering from a lot of this discussion, we're not really talking about that level of badges, but we do need to actually have that discussion around what badges are as badges when we just talk about badges as skills, badges as verification or as credits of knowledge, and then what they mean when badges are micro-credentials, or what is a micro-credential within the university, and when are we talking about badges as credentials? Because that's actually what we need to accept when we move between spaces. And maybe, you know, there's a lot of those badges that may be stacked and traded will mean something else. And I was, you know, in a meeting with Solent University the other night. They are talking about stacking and trading and what that will mean, and that's all by them, and you stack with a number of badges and you tell a specific narrative with them that they will be able to be worth a higher level badge that may be a micro-credential. But there's some of that discussion that, you know, we're having with Mozilla. There's a number of people in the policy work with Mozilla at the moment that are having that discussion as well, because that's the bit that we do have to get right. You know, because it's a big conversation. And within what's happening with the PhD work, I was showing someone the research integrity badge today, Inger, and someone was like, well, I should have that badge because I passed that test, you know, at Deakin. And I went, well, we should, we just haven't badged it. But yes, if we read the description, maybe we could apply. So in that, you know, earlier discussion around things that are working between us, digital literacy I might be able to apply for at ANU even though I'm a Deakin student, you know, or I could apply to UTS for that badge. If you go into Credly, some people leave them open, you know, and there's some universities who are leaving them open so that I can apply for that badge, or I can get the code and I can ask you to endorse me. You know, who the endorser is, and we were just writing in this, you know, pad before, issuer identity to me is incredibly important. So who's endorsing and who's issuing has to be a big part of that discussion around the big high-level badges, and then some of the lower-level badges as well. So I might be able to go, as a current PhD student, to ANU and say, can you badge me for this? Melbourne can't, but if I give you the evidence that I've passed the test and here's some other things that I can also do, could ANU do that for me? Melbourne might not accept it, but in terms of my own identity as a researcher, that might be something that I'm looking for to be validated. To be warranted in terms of that type of credit. That's where I think we actually need to have some of our discussions.
It's those kind of subjects, research integrity, which is mandated by the government. So we have research integrity as a compliance for government funding. We're all compliant under the same system. So if I think to myself, who is the one who's going to start to shepherd us around compliance? I actually think there's a role for government in that, and I think I don't think they want to touch it at the moment, but I really do think the NH and MRC set the guidelines that set the framework around our compliance around ethics would really, I think, be interested in seeing what we're doing in that space and seeing if there's a set of standards that all our courses should apply, you know, and therefore, yeah, then why not come to ANU and say, well, I can prove that I can do your test, or, you know, so, yeah, I agree. I just sort of think, where is the discussion going to happen? Is it going to happen in the GO8, amongst the GO8 deans? Is it going to happen with the government, with TEXA? Well, it's happening all over the place at the moment, but we all don't have a central body to look to that can facilitate the discussion. There's a lot of separate bodies that are implicated. So I think that in itself is really interesting terrain, that accountability terrain to have a look at.
Yeah. And just because I'm aware that we're kind of coming to the end of the hour, there was just something that you mentioned just there, Inger, just before that, about this idea that the badges actually kind of help a young researcher kind of build their identity. And I'm wary of calling on Bron because I'm aware that she's losing her voice. But I know that she's got some thoughts about, you know, how badges can actually help someone to create like a visual representation almost, you know, for their online identity. Bron, have you got time to just come into that? And I'm not sure whether she's available even.
Yeah. Somebody will have to take notes in my place. I'm sorry, I have a very problematic voice tonight. But yeah, I'm really interested in how badges that my choice of badges that I display can become part of my identity. Now, if a university, are the badges being forced through to them? Will they have to display them, or will they choose the bigger vision? I think for open badges is they have a choice of which ones I value to show externally. How do you see this working within the university and to project the academic identity or a possible work identity outward?
I don't know if you're asking me that, Bron, but one thing that I've said to Joyce from the start is that the problem I have with badges in my setting is that it's like a sticker with the back peeled off. You know, where do I stick it? And how do I make that decision? And how does the student make that decision? And we can see that in our user testing that they just don't know. And if I say keep it for your records, what do I really mean by that? And so I'm certainly very underdeveloped in my thinking around that. Kate probably has better ideas than me. I'm sure she does. Kate?
Just as you say my name, I'm trying to multitask and read the whole pad. So I'm listening to bits as I'm trying to read all the little bits about trust levels. I'm not going to answer because I don't have a good structured response, so I'll ponder for a minute.
But
yeah.
while we're saying that, it would be good if everybody who is on the mopad could help with the notes, because I can't talk and take the notes at the same time as well. So, and if people look at the notes, dates and events are being added into those notes that might be of interest to people down the track, and links to things. So, really important stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Bron, and thanks for typing your little fingers off. But absolutely, yeah, that mopad is there for people to do the collaborative note-taking and share any links or any resources that it's got, or just try to capture what it is that the panel is discussing. And with that, I think we've come to the end. I've just got one final question for Inger, which is, if someone was starting a similar project to yours now, what one tip would you give them?
Take your timeline and double it. Yeah. And and I would also emphasise the importance of the 12 cups of coffee methodology for getting things done inside the university. The importance of informal conversations cannot be overstated. I have to say, kind of things that I've met people in corridors, in kitchens, at the sidelines of other meetings, and I've got so much badge business done by saying, I need this, can you do this? So those networks that you have within the university, if you're serious about actually trying to integrate it into the work of the university, those networks with all those other key areas, knowing people in there and having support from them is really crucial. So marketing have been great supporters, alumni have been great. The ANU online team have had their hands tied, but they've also been great. Everyone's actually been really fantastic, even legal who've been painful, but it's their job to be painful, you know, they're just doing their jobs. And Katie and Emily and I have had many conversations where we sit down together and get frustrated and then remind ourselves everyone's just doing their job, and their aims are different to your aims. Their aims are to protect ANU's reputation, or their aim is to make sure ANU doesn't get sued, or their aim is to make sure that all the undergraduate students have access to their learning management platform and that the costs don't blow out. So everyone has different strategic aims or tactical aims than your team does. And it's just sort of finding those alignments or finding the path of least resistance through those multiple and competing aims. We have this joke, we're going to put it in our Ascolite slide deck, all your policies belong to us. You know, because everyone's policy seems to be fighting everyone else's policy. It's certainly not the people. The people have been great.
Okay, thanks for that. That's been really helpful. So with that, we've come to the end of today's call, and it feels like it's just sped by because there's been so much information, and my mind is whizzing a little bit about all of the things that I now have to go and follow up on. So, so thanks to Inger for sharing her project and what she's doing and sharing it so forthrightly. Thanks also to Kate for coming in and sharing her wealth of expertise about open badges, and particularly familiarity with overseas projects and what we can learn from that. Thanks, Kate, and we certainly hope to have you back on again to help inform everyone's badge understanding. And thanks to Dean and Braun for helping me to facilitate these sessions. We've been doing the collaborative note-taking in the MOPAD. Please, if you've got suggestions for speakers, and like we said, we're also trying to kind of get people from the K-12 perspective, or people who are using open badges in corporate environments, then we would love to get some speakers from that. But for now, the next community call will be the 4th of September, and that will be one of our open space calls. So anybody can put forth topics that they want, maybe something around learning design. There was a lot of talk about learning design today. There's also a lot of talk about visual design. Maybe we could actually just look at the design aspect. So with that, I'm ready to sign off. Anything else?
Joyce, I was just going to say, and the lovely Tyra Fagan will be our next case study next month, talking about CORE and the work they're doing for Connected Educators Month in New Zealand. So I think it's a different and equally interesting perspective, looking at badges attached to an event, a professional learning event over the month, with many events within that. So we're looking forward to hearing from Tara and the system that she's working through and the conversation that'll go with that. And hopefully I'll have a voice and be able to join in.
I hope so too. I hope you'll feel better then. But yeah, that will certainly be very interesting, because that is a very different way of using the badges. So it'll be great to hear about that from Tara. And so I hope everyone will tune back in. Thanks everyone for coming today. The video will be up on YouTube, and stay connected. Thanks everyone.
Thanks, Joyce. Thank you, everyone. See you soon.